That's a picture of my grandfather.
And where are you in here, Pastor Ron?
I'm the little guy there in the, I actually remember that jacket, plaid
do you?
jacket. Yeah, I liked that jacket. And my baby sister and my other younger sister and my brother, my grandfather, my grandmother, and my uncle. My uncle was sort of that weekend summer sort of a father figure for us, and sort of protected us, taught us a lot around the farm and how to ride the tractor, drive the tractor, and plow and look after things. He, when he sold the farm, he went into construction with some people. He was digging out a trench for a silo to fall in. They didn't tell him, give him heads up enough, and the silo fell on him and killed him. So that was a few years before my brother was killed. I think
So how old
I was
were
in
you?
grade 9,
Grade 9.
and that was really, really sad, and felt like we lost a father at that point.
It's a lot of difficult things that happen just within a short span of time. Your uncle, your dad, then your brother.
Yeah, it was. I actually have often thought my life has sort of been defined by grief, and death and dying people around me. Yeah, it's sort of there's a lot of that in my life. I'm actually shocked when somebody tells me at the age of 50 or so that they've never really lost someone close to them, because we had lost quite a few, and there was a period of time when I was pastoring at Stone Church. There was 12 close family and friends who died within a period of 2 to 3 years. My stepmother, my stepfather, and a really good friend died by suicide as well, and aunts and uncles. So there's those moments, and actually it was like compounded grief. And when they talk about concussions, if you have one concussion and you have time to get through it, you can navigate that fairly well and come back to the the center. But if there are multiple concussions, that adds and compounds your ability to come back to that place of being centered and well-being. And I believe it's the same with grief and loss. People who have tremendous sense of impact of grief and losing people, one after another, that will take years if you even do get back. You won't get back to where you were before.
Right.
You don't expect to, but you'll live life differently, and that's why when I look at some of these things, they bring memories and tears with that. And I think of some of the people who are dealing with the hostages. I think of Maureen and Danny and others in the Jewish community who, that October 7th, the impact of that was so horrific. Some of those people will never be the same again. They'll be able to find a place where they can sort of navigate in some sort of normality, but it won't be what was there before, and it will take a lot of time and support and help to get there. And that's why people like David Kennedy are meaningful in my life, because he's done grief and trauma and helped me to face and deal with things of loss. So, yeah.
Pastor Ron, thank you for giving us a glimpse into your life. Like, this is a very vulnerable part that you've shared.
Yeah.
And as you're talking about this cumulative and compounded grief, it changes any person. And I'm just thinking as I'm listening to you share this, is that I've always found that in your leadership, there is this phenomenal amount of compassion and empathy with which you lead. And I'm wondering if all of the grief that you've had to deal with at starting from such a young age, and that's kind of shaped into that deep empathy and compassion, because I find that you can very easily put yourself in other people's shoes when you lead.
Yeah, that, when my brother died, I remember my uncle, who was pastor at the time, Ray Running, came up to me and he said, give me a hug. And he also said, Ron, he said, you will pastor differently. And he quoted the old proverb, walk a mile in my shoes. And he said, you will now have understood what some people are going through in a meaningful way, and you'll pastor differently. And I did. But it also cost me at certain times. When it was so compounded, we didn't understand grief really well back then. When my brother died, I honestly thought, you just grin and bear it. You get up in the pulpit the next week and you just preach. And I remember going back to the house many times throughout the week and saying to my wife, do you think they noticed? Because I was dealing with being depressed and sad. But you weren't supposed to show it. You were supposed to grin and bear it, buck up, and do what you got to do. And I do remember many times saying for probably 6 months, you know, I hope they don't notice how sad I am, which is tragic. Mm-hmm. This reminds me of that. On my uncle's farm, we would get up and we would sleep, overnight on the weekends. I used to actually get on the milk truck, which would go from Aylmer to Ingersoll area on my Saturday mornings. If I couldn't get a ride on the Friday night, I would go there on a Saturday morning, and I would be at the farm till the weekend. And on the Sundays, we'd be watching Walt Disney, and we'd be watching Bonanza and the hockey game on Saturday night. And as it was really my safe place, because my home didn't always feel that way. When my grandmother passed away, we were able to take things that were meaningful for us, and family, just laid out everything. And I've got antique books there. I've got some books from the 1800s that were my grandmother's, and I've written about that. But this was sitting on the morning breakfast table every morning. And we would have our hot chocolate or some tea or whatever, or chocolate milk. And after going down and doing the chores in the morning at 6 o'clock and then coming back for breakfast, and you'd open that up, and that's where she would take up the old pieces of toast and that weren't eaten, and she'd cut them into small pieces, and she'd make breadcrumbs. And fill this full of breadcrumbs. So you'd put that in your soup, and I just remember when we were having soup, and we wanted some of the little breadcrumbs. That was there, and sort of a meaningful. So that sits at home on a shelf.
It looks so pretty.
Yeah, it's old. I don't know much about where it came from or the history of what was initially in there.
Yeah.
But I do know, for me, it reminds me of that safe place and those safe years, and with my grandmother and my uncle, my brother and I, and my 2 sisters. They were a little bit younger, but they hung around there with us too. We had a lot of fun.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Thank you.
What about that Harley mug that is sitting behind that?
That's a different story. That's as I got older. My wife and I do some or did some trips. I think I mentioned earlier that my wife no longer rides on the back. A couple of stories, but yeah, in 2004 I got my motorcycle license. It's really nice to get away on a motorcycle. You have to focus, and the wind is coming at you, and you're riding down the road, and you got your music turned on, and that's just you, and that, and sort of therapeutic.
Thank you, Pastor Ron. I feel like you opened your heart and let us into your most cherished memories and most and vulnerable spaces as well. Thank you for doing that for us today.
You're
We
welcome.
still want to talk more to you, so we will continue that in our next segment. Please join us in our next talk with Pastor Ron.
Thank you.